This is the Justicefighter podcast. Justicefighter podcast. With attorney Gerald Griggs. Attorney G. Where we have conversations on social justice, civil rights, and political news that affects us all. Let attorney Griggs put you on game. Only on the Justicefighter podcast, y'all.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's attorney Gerald Griggs of Justicefighter. We are here on Justicefighter podcast, and I wanted to bring some information directly to you that I saw on some social media posts, and I could think of no one better than to bring the information than my good friend in the social justice world. Devin, kind of introduce yourself to the people and kind of tell them what's going on right now.
Thank you, Gerald, and I really appreciate being able to speak on your platform and share information with our people, with our constituency, with the community. My name is Devin Barrington Ward. I serve as the managing director of the Black Futurist Group, where we build Black futures because there is no future. It's the Black future, and the future for Black people is safe and secure and prosperous. And I am also a candidate for Georgia State Senate District 38 in the upcoming May 19th Democratic primary.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm going to let you tell everybody about your run in a few minutes. But I was on, I believe it was either Twitter or Facebook, and you put out a national call for a rent petition for the governor and the mayor to sign. Kind of tell the people what's going on.
Yeah, so what we have seen is we know that the pandemic known as COVID-19 is not just a health pandemic, but it is also having major implications in our financial systems, in our healthcare settings, and in the economics, in the real economy, as we would refer to it. And so with that chaos and with that uncertainty, we know that it impacts folks who were already experiencing the glaring inequities in our communities as it pertains to the level to be able to access health care services, and also the glaring inequities in our economic systems and the wealth that Black and Brown people are able to curate in their communities and in their households. And because of that, the concern is that we're going to see a lot of hurt in Black and Brown communities and low-income communities. And the government needs to, before we're talking about bailouts for large corporations that have hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars in profit where they can weather out the storm, we need to be talking about what are the relief packages and what are the special considerations that are going to be given to everyday people. And one of those things is the suspension of rent, mortgage, and utility payments in this process. And the reason why we want to do that is for a couple of reasons. One is good practice. Several jurisdictions in the country have already talked about doing this or have already given that directive. As a matter of fact, here in the city of Atlanta, our mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, let city residents know that there would be no disconnection of water services for the next 60 days. And Georgia Power, on their own, has decided to not move forward with any disconnections for the next 30 days. But as we hear more and more from federal officials, particularly those who are aware of public health trends and pandemics, we know that this may continue beyond 14 days, that this may be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks of the social isolation, and that is also going to be impacted by the timeline in terms of when people are going to be adjusting back to what the new normal is going to be. And so while we're doing that, we need to make sure that people can stay in their homes, because it's social isolation and the limiting of the amount of folks that are out in the public. People need to be able to do that knowing that they are going to be able to stay in their home and they're not going to receive threatening letters from landlords or corporations that are looking for money when many folks are out of work right now or may be out of work once all of this is said and done. And so that is why I'm supporting this national effort specifically here in Georgia, but the broader effort. The Twitter handle is Rent Strike 2020. and it's birthed out of progressive candidates from other areas of the country. I am going to have a link to a petition on my website, devinforstatesenate.com, where folks will be able to sign on to that petition and let folks know that we need our political leaders in this time to put people over profit, and that we need to bring some certainty and reduce the level of anxiety. We know that most Americans, including people in Metro Atlanta and in my district, cannot afford a $400 emergency. This is an international emergency of global proportions. And while we will survive this and we will adjust and we will thrive, because that is the resiliency of the communities that I'm a part of, we also know that we need the government and political leaders that represent those communities to be in solidarity and be good partners and use policy and the legislative process to benefit the communities that are going to be impacted the most by the outbreak of COVID-19 and the aftermath.
Definitely. And I appreciate you coming to the forefront and bringing this to the people's attention. I'm actually at the Google Doc for Rent Strike 2020, and it says Governor Brian Kemp suspend rent, mortgage, utility payments during the coronavirus crisis. COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, has been classified as a global pandemic. Georgia already has at least 99 cases statewide, including one death. State and federal officials are encouraging people who feel sick to stay home, but many workers struggle to make rent and mortgage payments, and the choice to skip work for the sake of the community health could leave them and their families unsheltered. In order to protect the health and housing security of our community, we, the undersigned, call on Governor Kemp to act now so workers wouldn't have to make that choice. Specifically, we call for a suspension of all rent, mortgage, and utility payments for 2 full months to allow people to do what they need to do in order to take care of themselves, their loved ones, and the community. The legacy of every public official currently serving will be determined in the next few months. It's time to act now and choose the right side of history, choose the people. And so you can go to his website. Devin, tell them the website again.
devinforstatesenate.com. You can go there and the petition will be there as well. You can also visit our corporate website, blackfuturistgroup.com, and that petition will be there as well.
And I will also share it on this podcast. It will be in the comment section. So you can make sure you go on there and click on there. But Devin, I want to kind of shift. I said we were going to do this and talk about your campaign. So I want you to kind of introduce people to your campaign, which district it's in for state senate, and what your platform is here on Justicefighter podcast.
Thank you for again for the opportunity to talk about this. My campaign is birthed out of my experience working on behalf of Black and brown people for the last 15 years. I got started as a high school student in DeKalb County, and people invested in me. Young Black elected officials invested in me. One of those folks were Stacey Abrams, who gave me one of my first jobs as a canvasser knocking on doors when she was running for office in 2006. And I took that opportunity, and it afforded me with the chance to work on health policy for Black folks and brown folks and marginalized communities, work on criminal justice reform, advance equitable education priorities for Black and brown early child care providers in the state. And I've done that in various positions as a chief of staff, a communications director, a senior policy advisor, and other roles in community. I took that experience and went to Washington, D.C. and worked on behalf of communities that look like the same communities in my district. My district is the west side, northwest Atlanta, and some of southwest Atlanta. So it starts at the top with the southern portion of Buckhead, so Howell Mill Road, West Paces Ferry area. Then it comes down to West Midtown, so everything west of IKEA. Then Bankhead. I have Mableton and Smyrna in Cobb County. Then parts of Mableton and Smyrna. Then I also have Collier Heights, Cascade, and some of the city of South Fulton, both the Cascade part and the city of Atlanta part. Ben Hill and Campbellton. So it's a very large district. About 120,000 residents live there. And the community has a variety of needs that I'm uniquely positioned to work on. We have some of the poorest health outcomes. We have some of the highest rates of HIV in the country in our district. We have, cancer-causing gas that is released by chemical plants regularly. And it's part of the reason why residents in the community I immediately live in, Bankhead, have a life expectancy of 62 and a half versus folks who live just 10 minutes up the street in Buckhead who can expect to live almost to be 90 on average. And we don't have to look very far on why there's such a disparity in terms of how long people live in these various communities, because we know the communities where we see the poorest life expectancy numbers are the communities that are dealing with the hypercriminalization and the lack of criminal justice reform, that are dealing with the lack of affordable housing and homelessness, that are dealing with the environmental racism that contributes to poor health outcomes, and the lack of equitable economic investment, that the only time they see investment in the community is when it's from a place that does not center neighborhoods, that does not center historic residents, and doesn't center the wellness of all of us. And so my campaign is really about, making those issues a priority and showing up and showing out. We need, we have grown in a time, and I think this COVID-19 pandemic reveals this even more so, that complacency will be our undoing. And we can no longer afford to vote in the same incumbents because that's what we're comfortable doing. We can't afford to continue to support the status quo because the status quo is literally killing people, harming people. It's creating unnecessary burdens and barriers to self-actualization. And so we really need to move in a different direction, and this campaign affords people with that opportunity. I am 30 years old as of last Friday. I turned 30 on Friday the 13th.
Congratulations.
And thank you. I appreciate that. And, it's really exciting to be a young person on the ballot, one of the youngest people running for state senate in Georgia currently, and also to be able to bring all of my various identities as the son of immigrants from the Caribbean, who were freedom fighters. My ancestors were freedom fighters down there. My great-grandmother, Cassandra Bogle, is related to Paul Bogle, which is one of Jamaica's national heroes, because he led a rebellion against the British colonial government.
Okay.
He led rebellions against the British colonial government, in protest of Jim Crow-like laws in 1865. And so bringing that history along with my experience of being a member of the LGBT community, being a Black organizer who has, been organizing with so many different organizations in Atlanta, including the NAACP on the Close the Jail campaign, and moving the city to move in a different direction around criminal justice reform as it pertains to the legalization and or the criminalization of cannabis. And so I'm bringing all of these various experiences and this work history to the state Senate run to show people that we can do something different and that it is our responsibility to create the future because we can't predict it.
And we appreciate all the work that you've been doing. You named some of the things that you've been doing, organizing. It's been a pleasure working with you. And so I was excited to hear about your run, being that you are 30 and that you see so many things from the ground and from the people, and now bringing that potential experience to an elected office would be something great. So kind of just tell us, what your idea of moving us forward would happen in the first 100 days if you were elected.
So if I'm elected, some of the legislation that we want to move forward in the first 100 days are definitely priorities around criminal justice reform. We need to end cash bail throughout the state. It creates an unfair playing field as it pertains to freedom for folks who have not fully gone through the adjudication of their case. But bail oftentimes serves as a way to really label people as the criminal before they've gotten the true opportunity to go through the process, particularly for nonviolent offensive here in the state. We want to make sure that that's not a barrier for people to be able to, fully go through their case while also being able to take care of themselves and their families. We also want to make sure that we are, legalizing cannabis. I think one of the issues here in Georgia is that we arrest folks for far too many things that are not truly barriers to the public safety. And while other communities across the country are moving forward with the legalization of cannabis, and while Georgia has also made some inroads in that effort as far as legalizing medical cannabis, what we have not done is we haven't gone back to make whole the communities that are impacted by the war on drugs that are now sitting on the sidelines as other communities are participating in a $66 billion industry that less than 4% of people of color or Black people are owners in that industry and able to partake in those profits. Equity is a theme that is centered throughout this campaign. In addition to that, I want to increase the microloan program. I think Councilmember Antonio Brown done a great job championing that at the city level, and we want to reflect and make sure that there's parallel money at the state level so that we can maximize the resources to, minority-owned businesses so that they can start, being able to provide services, particularly services and goods that are really needed in this new time that we're in, where this pandemic has really shown so many of the inequities and the gaps as far as our ability to be able to respond. And I think that the communities in District 38 are innovative, are smart, and can offer solutions that can address our global needs, but they just need the investment. And then also, rent control and affordable housing. As new units come online, as density increases in the city of Atlanta, we want to make sure that there are carve-outs for units that cannot exceed a certain price point, so that both people can continue to afford to live in the neighborhoods that we cherish here in the city of Atlanta. But we also want to make sure that we're providing, the end of any source of income discrimination, so that people who have vouchers are able to, as long as they meet the requirements, are able to rent housing just the same way as if someone was paying for it market rate. Because at the end of the day, as long as the landlord is being paid, that's the most important thing, particularly in a space where affordability is such an issue. So those are some of the initial things that I know that I have through conversations with my neighbors I want to champion. But I also want to ground it with prior to every legislative session, it's my plan to have convene my constituency and go through community vision boarding and participatory government practices and take folks down to the state capitol when we have a list of legislation that constituencies feel and across the district feel like they are a part of, that they were a part of writing. And we will go and pre-file that legislation together ahead of every legislative session. So that way my colleagues and the governor and other constituencies across the state can say that the legislation that comes out of the Senate District 38 office is always grounded from the needs of community, and that community are fully involved in our legislative priorities. And that is something that is currently lacking out of the current office holder.
Yeah, that's definitely not happening down at the Gold Dome. And I want to kind of let you talk about one of the most powerful experiences that we had together as organizers, and that was a Count Every Vote rally, where you were arrested. And I want people to get a full grasp of the level of your dedication to the people. So kind of tell them about what happened and then, what happened after the rally and kind of build into that.
I have to talk about that. And it's really interesting. I wasn't going to talk about it unless you brought it up.
Uh-huh.
But because it is something that I think about at times, and other times it's a moment that was very traumatic. And I try not to think about it all the time. But to talk about that moment, I have to talk about before. I was, at my house, and before I got to the Capitol, I had gotten off a conference call, and folks were sending love and support to Georgia, because we were in this period where it was clear that the state officials engaged in very nefarious tricks to disenfranchise people from the ability to fully participate in the democratic process in 2018. And so I started to cry. And I didn't, I was like, as somebody who works in politics, you lose elections, losing an election is something that's a possibility. Somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. But this felt very different. It felt like this was robbery, that this was intentional government dysfunction, that this was, done strategically. And for someone to see it done to what would have been the first Black woman to be governor in the history of Georgia, and also one of the first people to give me a job and an opportunity to work in politics, was really disheartening. When I got to the Capitol, I was there with my best friend, Max Boykin, and we saw you. We saw our amazing organizer, our amazing sister Mary Hook, chanting. I saw Senator Nikema Williams and other people using their voice to protest robbery. Now, at the Capitol, I've seen plenty of people protest. I've seen people come to the Capitol and protest their right to carry and bear arms, and protest outside of the Capitol with guns. I've seen protesters under the leadership of former state senator, Senator Ford, protest the lack of Medicaid expansion, and actually do that from the gallery, which we know those are the rules where that is not allowed. And I was surprised by the aggression that I saw from our state law enforcement when we were down there, because we were protesting in an area that is deemed as the People's House. The rotunda of the People's House is the area that is the designated area for protest. And all that we came down there with was our signs, our outrage, and our voice. And to see state troopers surround us like we were a foreign force attempting to occupy land that we had no rights to see state troopers drag old women to the ground, to see state troopers threaten to tase someone just because they were the tallest and the most dark-skinned person out of the group of people who were arrested was very surreal. I had remembered a few days ago that my grandmother, for the first time, told me the story about how, as a new, citizen in the country from Jamaica, she was coming from upstate New York when the news of Dr. King's assassination made it out, and she was driving through Harlem to get to Brooklyn, and she saw police hosing down people in the street. And it was incredible to me that in 2018, I was going through an experience that was very much aligned with the reality of what she saw in the 60s. Where I did find a lot of courage and where I did find a lot of joy was the rebellious optimism in the midst of our rights being abused twice. Our right to vote was abused, and then our right to peacefully protest and assemble was abused. But people continued to chant. People continued to let folks know that we were serious about counting every vote. I was encouraged when the older women at the Fulton County Jail that were doing the booking and doing our fingerprints and our photos told us they were proud of us because they wanted their vote to mean something. And I was encouraged because I saw the strength of Black women like Mary Hook and Senator Nikema Williams be fearless. And because they were fearless, the rest of us were fearless. And they held us for almost 10 hours. That was my first time being arrested. And it was interesting that I was arrested at a jail that many people in my family had come in and out of. For various things, oftentimes related to the poverty and the over-criminalization that existed in our communities and still do. And so I took that experience, and it is what fueled me to be very bullheaded in my push along with Marilyn Wind and Sochi Bavera of the Racial Justice Action Center and Women on the Rise, and Tony Michelle Williams of Solutions Not Punishment Collaborative, to join with them to demand the closure and the repurposing of the Atlanta City Detention Center, because I saw how a jail was being used to silence political dissent, how the correctional system is used to hold people who are mentally, who are dealing with the mental challenges of life that really need support services and care, and not a jail cell. And I see how the criminal justice system is used as the scapegoat or the parachute that we assign all of the inequities to in society that we don't want to do the work to actually fix. And so, that experience gives me also the fuel that's needed to do this campaign and to be able to be very serious about running for office and being the state senator for the community that I represent as my full self, because I have done this work as my full self. The reason why we have been able to move forward, prep legislation for making sure that low-income people can get pre-exposure prophylactics to prevent HIV infection for free is because I've shown up as my full self. Why I was appointed by Commissioner Natalie Hall of Fulton County to the Fulton County Board that addresses homelessness is because I used my previous experiences being formerly homeless when I was much younger. And, the 24-hour FedEx Kinko's was my home in the downtown Equitable building. It was my home for 2 or 3 months on and off. And so I've been able to take that experience and work on housing and homeless policy in Washington, D.C. and here in the city of Atlanta. And so the reason why the work that I do has impact in community, and while it will continue to have impact as a state senator, is because I show up and I show up as my full self.
And we appreciate you for doing that. While you were talking, I was just remembering the feeling that was in the rotunda. And of course, that's the most sacred place for protest in our state. The feeling of a return to the 60s and seeing freedom fighters in real time really show up like their ancestors showed up. And so it's been an honor to be on the front lines with you. I'm proud of the run that you are running, and my platform is always open. So in the last 10 minutes, could you just please tell people how they can get in touch with you when the election is and what you need from them?
Yeah. So you can get in touch with me at devinforstatesenate.com. That's DEVIN for FUR state STATE Senate SENATE.com. Devin for State Senate. You can also find us on social media at Devin for State Senate as well. And you can connect with me personally, Devin Barrington Ward. I add everybody on my social media when I can because I want to be able to connect with as many folks in real time. What we need for people is to show up on May 19th and to show up and show up for the future. And showing up for the future means that you are not only participating in the political process, but that you are being informed and that you're coming towards the ballot with a vision, as you wrote, with a vision for the future that you want to see. And I believe if you want a future that is grounded in equity, if you want a future where we undo the harms done by the war on drugs, if you want a future where we truly invest in a healthcare system that is concerned and grounded in the needs of all of us, if you want a future where equitable economic development is not an afterthought, then this is the campaign that you want to support. And so May 19th is going to be really important. The presidential primaries have also been moved to May 19th here in Georgia. If things do change and the election is pushed out further, we will communicate that with folks. And the best way to stay in touch with us is at that website and at those social media handles that I shared a little earlier. We need volunteers. We recognize that people will be home with some extra time on their hands. And so we're working on scaling up our virtual phone banking. And so we'll have some information about that in the next few days that we'll share on our website and our social media, where we'll be able to train people on how they can phone bank for us at home, and share with people who will also be at home, because we hopefully hope that people will be following orders that are grounded in good public health practice. Don't just follow any and everything that doesn't make sense. Good public health practice. The social distancing, not to get off point, but the social distancing is important. The CDC is recommending that you can be with folks 10 or less. The order for the city of Atlanta is 50 or less. And we also know in general, if these are folks that you aren't necessarily super familiar with, that you want to keep, 6 feet of distance apart from the other person is the recommended distance that you should have with the other person. And that also you want to be limiting the amount of time that you're spending in large public places. Many of those places are going to be closing soon. But grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies, and other essential services will be open. So if you need things, you'll be able to get them. But this is going to be the new normal for the next 2 to 4 to possibly 6 or 8 weeks. So with that being said, that will give people some time to be at home and do some reflection, and also engage in some volunteerism in the work that will build our future, because we will come out of this. But will we really be prepared for what is ahead of us? And the best way to do that is to spend the time that we will be doing more restrictive movement and time more at home, with being very intentional about how you engage in your community. And we believe this campaign is one of the best ways that you can do that.
Well, we really appreciate you bringing that message to the people and letting them know how they can get involved. So like I said before, if you ever need a platform, it's wide open. Guys, it's been Attorney Gerald Griggs, the Justicefighter, with Devin Barrington Ward. Please go to his website and make sure that you volunteer, and make sure that you stay safe during the COVID-19 break that we're having right now. And then make sure that, as he said, you use this time to reflect on how you can become more involved in the community, because we are the change that we're looking for. So this is Attorney Gerald Griggs, the Justicefighter, on the Justicefighter podcast. Thank you again, Devin.
Thank you.
This is the Justicefighter podcast. Justicefighter podcast with Attorney Gerald Griggs. Attorney G. Where we have conversations on social justice, civil rights, and political news that affects us all. Let Attorney Griggs put you on game. Only on the Justicefighter podcast, y'all.